Hey all, it's your girl Aaron, and it's another episode of Traffic Video, I guess. Today I wanted to talk about collectivism and individualism and egoism. So I'm basically just gonna say what's on my mind. I noticed that the sun is like highlighting my beard here. So I guess that's okay. I'll try not to be self-conscious, but sort of does need a bit of a trim. Anyway, let's talk about collectivism, individualism, and egoism. So what brought this about was just thinking about how people confuse egoism as individualist, and I think it's probably an easy mistake to make, because the language, you know, in other everyday life talking, you might use those concepts interchangeably, because people often think of being egoist as having a big ego, or thinking like that you are like the shit or whatever. Like, yeah, people confuse egoism basically just as propping up the ego, where that's kind of like point one of egoism, is that actually your ego is a nothingness. So it's called the creative void, or the creative nothingness, but it's not meant to say that you're an empty being. It's just meant to say that there isn't any starting point. You define yourself. That's literally all it means, is that you know, you get to define who you are. So it's where you construct yourself from. That's why it's creative. It's your starting point, but it isn't, you know, like itself a thing. So yeah, so when we talk about egoism, what we are really talking about is self-interest. So some people do get this correct, and they actually do acknowledge that egoism is self-interest, but then they go and they say that therefore to break it down for you, for egoism, is that it's the idea that everything that you do and everything you want comes out of a self-interest. So if you are someone who is just like living in the moment, enjoying yourself, and then it's actually quite easy to spot that you are living a self-interested life. For other people, though, they struggle to realize that that is the case, because they've basically been telling themselves that there are external realities to which they owe their loyalty or what have you. And so let's take, for example, we could look at religion, basically. So looking at like people who consider themselves to live a life of self-sacrifice for, you know, God or a good cause or whatever. So basically, those people, they are also making those decisions out of self-interest, even though they might be telling themselves, I'm not going to do this because it would make God unhappy or be against my beliefs. Well, I am going to do this because it will make God happy, or is in line with my beliefs. But it's the my beliefs part that's important, because even though it is a self-sacrificial action, it is still you choosing it. So you choose to be a person who does a self-sacrifice, and so it is still in your self-interest, because you would rather be the one doing the self-sacrifice for the entity or ideology, you're still choosing to be that one rather than someone who doesn't take that as the expectation placed on them. So it kind of may be difficult for people who are religious to adapt to an ego, or to adapt to an egoist way of thinking, because for so long they've always told themselves that, you know, they are doing things for others, they're doing things for God, or whatever. So now there's not really, so in some ways you can have a healthy understanding of God and be religious. So as long as your religion and your spirituality is materialist, and so what that means is you're not placing your beliefs above reality. So for example, we look at science, and science tells us that the earth is X number of millions of years old, and that we are evolved, that evolution is the process where organisms adapt and mutate to the environment. And so that's basically what science tells us, and it's been very, very extensively observed and proved, and there's no active doubt in the scientific community as to Earth being millions of years old and evolution being a real thing. But if you have a religious belief that tells you that actually the world is only, say, 6,000 years old and that evolution isn't real, to assert those beliefs outwardly is to put your beliefs and your perception above that of science. Now, that isn't to say science is always right. The first thing you learn, or you should learn about science, is that there is no absolute truth. And so what that means is anything is only true to the degree to which it can be demonstrated to be true. It's nice to have elegant ideas and theories that sum everything up, but until you can show through proof and evidence that those ideas hold out to experimentation, then they aren't to be given the status of fact. So until you've given some kind of evidence that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and you know you've been able to prove it, and you can get and I don't just mean prove it as in you give a defense. You got to have it peer reviewed, go into scientific journals, and to be honest, you're probably going to win the Nobel Prize or something, because to be able to actually prove that evolution isn't real, or that the Earth is only a few thousand years old, that is such a really advanced breakthrough in science, if it happened, that it would literally change the world. So yeah, so if you do have proof, then sure, stick to your belief that it's a fact, but try to get that proof out there, because you really have world-changing evidence on your hands. But until then, I'm gonna assume that you don't have that evidence, because I haven't seen anyone giving that evidence, and until they do, I'm going to believe the evidence of the science. So basically what I'm trying to say is that I don't have a problem with people believing in God or having any kind of spiritual belief, but I do think it's important that those beliefs get based on evidence and stuff. And so yeah, so that's why it might be difficult for someone who has a kind of religious upbringing, who may have been told that certain beliefs are true without there being evidence of the fact, and despite them being things that there's evidence to the contrary. And so you've got to actually change the authority that you're placing. So the beliefs and ideas that you are allowing to be your truth and allowing to determine your facts, you are putting too much priority on those, and you are so I guess when people talk about egoists, they often talk about that everyone on earth is an egoist. So, you know, obviously not everyone's going to be following like the theories of egoism, and not everyone's going to be self-identifying as an egoist. But whether people are embracing of egoism or not, they are still acting out of self-interest. So even if you're not aware of it, you are an egoist. That's basically what the theory of egoism says. And so what that means is that, like, some people are aware that they are doing all the things they do out of self-interest, and some people aren't. So the words that are often used for that is you can be a conscious egoist or an unconscious egoist. And literally all it means is you are either conscious of the fact that everything you're doing is out of self-interest, or you're unconscious to that fact. But it is still a fact, and it is still happening. And, well, I'm calling it a fact, but unlike evolution and the age of the earth, it's really difficult for evidence of conscious facts. So when I say it's a fact, that is not based on any. So I know that maybe it gets confusing because I was just saying like your facts, but like when it comes to things that have no scientifically determined proof, you do have to kind of go on speculation and anecdotal evidence and stuff. So when it comes to sort of what's called sociology, or the study of social psychology, or society, or people as they are relate socially, that's generally been something that has not had a factual, like, so like when it comes to gravity, space, planets, time, like the speed of light and all that, it took like someone like Einstein to come up with mathematical equations that you could plug in all the different variables of, okay, it's this far away, it weighs this much, you know, all that kind of stuff, it's this size, whatever, and you would be able to use those equations to figure out you know, properties of it. So okay, I know the gravity and the size of it, therefore I can figure out the mass or whatever. So those equations describe the relationships between those different things. Now, we have not had that same type of theory when it comes to sociology. We have, I'm sure people have tried, but it's, I think until we can actually like read minds, like technologically, we wouldn't really be able to test it, because like you can come up with a theory that people are thinking XYZ, but you can't prove it until you can ask people like, is this how you think and stuff. But then you fall into the problem that not everyone actually even knows 100% like how their thoughts are and emotions are. So it's a really difficult area to talk about. And so the reason why I would go so far as to say it's a fact is just because of me personally. So it's a personal fact and not a scientific fact. But yeah, I hope that wasn't confusing the way it changes. But basically, yeah. So when you do things out, you are doing them out of self-interest, and And so people have mistaken egoism as being individualist, and so I think you've got to be really confused to do that, and you've got to be confused in a specific way. And the way that you need to be confused is to think that putting yourself first in every case is the best thing for yourself. So if egoism says that we do things out of self-interest, then if you claim that egoism is individualist, then what you're claiming is that acting in an individualist way is in our self-interest. So you have to be confused in a particular way of you actually have to be almost in favor of individualism to arrive at the point that egoism is individualist. Because if you, on the contrary, if you think that collectivism is the correct or the most compatible way, wait, am I getting off the right highway here? I don't think so. So if you think individualism is compatible with the human consciousness, if you think that putting yourself first is how we arrive, if everyone put themselves first and not really cared about the collective, if everyone did that, and then we'd have a good society. That's basically what individualism says. And what collectivism says is, no, to have a good society, you've got to put, well, some would say you've got to put the collective above yourself. I would argue that it's really a false dichotomy. But I would say that collectivism overrules individualism simply by the fact that we are social beings and we exist within collectives. That is the human condition. And that's why I would think that collectivism is actually what's in your self-interest. And so, yeah, basically whatever you think is in everyone's best interest, that's what you'll think egoism is. So if you think individualism is in everyone's best interest, then you would think that putting your self-interest first would be putting individualist interests first. But if you think that collectivism is in everyone's self-interest, then egoism means for you putting the collective first, so that it is in your self-interest to be aware of and act in harmony with the collective. And so yeah, Max Stirner, who wrote a lot about egoism, he spoke about collectivist ideas. He spoke about a union of egoists as the best way for society to organize itself. And again, if a whole bunch of people were egoist and individualist, then their union of egoists would be kind of self-contradictory, because they'd be collectivizing around individualism, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, although it is what a lot of people end up doing. That it's not, I don't see it as a good way of living. But now, yeah, so if your union of egoists is with people who are most interested in living in harmony in a collective, in a society, yeah, so basically, like, if you want to claim, sorry, I'm like jumping around, but if you want to claim individualism is like the best way for society, you basically are going to be pro like everyone living in silos. You're going to be pro like each individual person basically living off the land themselves. And while there's nothing wrong with you living off the land or living alone, it's the idea that that's what everyone needs to do, or that a good society is made up of everyone doing that. That's the problem, because it's basically a rejection of living in teamwork and living in community. And so I think it's kind of the capitalist way of thinking. And so yeah, I think what's in everyone's best interests is collectivism. I think that if you want to have the best life for yourself, that you need to make sure that you're not harming other people in your community, so that you are not a source of disunity. And then if everyone else is as well doing that and also making sure not to be harmful to the collective, then the whole collective itself becomes a healthy environment for you to be in. And then when you're living in that healthy, harmonious relationship with the community and the collective around you, then you still have your individual freedom. And so that's why we shouldn't, and I think that's also why it's important that we have an egoist type of collectivism rather than a sort of collectivism absence of egoism. Because a collectivism absence of egoism would say that you need to collectivize, but it isn't implying for self-interest. It's implying maybe that there is a collective interest, and so what it might do is subject your own personal individual agency. It would put it below the will of the collective. So that gets into dodgy types of vibes where it's like there's maybe a state or a centrally planned economy, and they are basically telling you you know, what you need to produce or what you can consume and whatever, and they are overruling your individual agency to, you know, using the collective as an excuse. Now, that collective that gets established that way, that's not a healthy collective. It's not a union of egoists. It's a union of maybe unconscious egoists, but it's uniting around something that isn't necessarily in your self-interest. And so when you have a egoist collectivism, that's when you specifically like saying that your collectivism needs to be in people's self-interest as well. So it basically keeps your collective honest, where it has to be a collective that serves the people in its self-interest, because if it doesn't, then it's not egoist. And so I think it's like a really harmonious combination of ideologies, and I think that without egoism, you know, whether you like if you think, yeah, so without egoism, if you try to do collectivism, it's gonna be like, it's gonna end up being the vibe that people like, specifically like maybe bottom rights, like ANCAPs, or like you know, people who want to be free from the government but they're not that interested in freedom from capitalism or whatever, they're going to see your collective as the horror nightmare of that happened in like the USSR or whatever. They're going to think that's the kind of collective that you're trying to establish, and they're going to be worried about it, and they kind of aren't to blame for that, and they're kind of not wrong to do that, because you have this mechanism in your collective to override the agency, and they correctly recognize that it is, you know, a disempowering position, and that there's the centrally planned people who get to make decisions for you are going to hold power over you. So it's actually correct of them, you know, to fear such a collectivism. And so having your collectivism be egoist is going to save you from being at war with those types of people, and you're going to potentially be able to actually radicalize them and help them to see the problems in capitalism and move over to a libertarian socialist type of vibe. And you're only going to be able to do that because your collectivism is egoist, because it is a self-interest based union. It is people working together for mutual aid, not because some authority told them to. So that's going to save you there. and then it's also going to save you from falling to thinking that that's a good idea to do that kind of collectivism. So yeah, basically that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I know that's kind of been long and whatever, but like, you don't have to watch if you see me in the car, it's probably going to be like this. So if it's not your vibe, it's cool, but if you found this interesting, then like, that's awesome. Hopefully it was interesting to some people, and I would like to speak more about this topic. So yeah, maybe something I said is confusing, or it doesn't make sense, or you disagree with it, or it sounds wrong to you, or whatever. If so, I'd really like it if you could drop a comment, because it's the kind of thing I want to tackle as more of a conversation, and I need to know where the concepts are breaking down for people and where things aren't making sense, for me to know what extra nuance or details I need to give and stuff. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching or listening. Hope you have an awesome day, and that'll be it for me. Bye.